comics. I'm Joe Getcho, and this is SpideyJoe's One-Shots. Today I'll be covering issues 1 through 4 of Marvel's Spider-Woman from 2014, which is collected in a mini-series called Spider-Woman Spider-Verse, which was written by Dennis Hopeless, as he was known then, but more commonly known today as Dennis Hallum, who's written 3 volumes for Spider-Woman. Illustrations were done by Greg Land, who is unfortunately famous for lifting images from sources that include hardcore pornography and copying them into his pages outright with minimal Photoshop alterations to make the work appear to be an original drawing. But fortunately, besides the typical skin-tight suit for Spider-Woman, they're rest assured that there's nothing pornographic about any of the art in this volume. Anywho, if you haven't listened to our podcast episodes, I encourage you to listen to Season 1, Episode 11, where Mike and I review Edge of Spider-Verse and provide some context for the Spider-Verse event that happened back in 2014. I'd also recommend listening to Episode 12, Spider-Woman Origin, to get the inside scoop on the background and history of Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman. If you recall from our podcast episode on the Spider-Verse, the Inheritors are searching for people with spider powers to consume said power, and they are very hangry. But there's another character in the story as well, one Cindy Moon, aka Silk, who was introduced during the Dan Slott run of Spider-Man in 2014. Before I get into reviewing Spider-Woman Spider-Verse, you may be wondering to yourself, who the heck is Silk? I'm glad you asked that question. Somehow, the same spider that bit Peter Parker and changed him into Spider-Man managed to scuttle off and bite one Cindy Moon in the ankle before dying, and now she has superpowers. Now, don't stop the video. It gets better, I promise. So she actually has organic webbing, sort of like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in the MCU. I'm so glad I get to say that. But her webbing comes out of her fingertips, so she's able to weave it in a more complex fashion. Then a man by the name of Ezekiel Sims, who is yet another spider-powered being, came and took Cindy away to train her in the use of her powers. He's like the only person that knows the Inheritors are coming, and he's also very rich, so he created bunkers that would hide anyone with spider powers from the outside world. And then a mercenary known as the Orb, who has a giant eyeball as a head and one in his chest, revealed some of the Watcher's secrets to the world, one of which was the location of the bunker that Cindy Moon was kept in. Oops, well, that's what you get in comic books. So naturally, Spider-Man comes to investigate, tells her that Morlun is dead, and she can now be free. Cindy spins an improvised costume of webs over her body and face and told Spider-Man to start calling her Silk before heading out. They must have forgot that no one in comics really stays dead, at least not forever, so naturally Morlun comes back and his family is also kind of upset and hangry, like I mentioned earlier, which basically brings us to the crazy dimension-hopping antics of Spider-Woman Spider-Verse.
Look! Up on the building! It's Spider-Woman!
Alright, let's dive into the story. Since this is a Spider-Verse crossover, the story starts off with Spider-Woman and Silk already engaged in dimension-hopping antics, like I mentioned earlier. They go to save some civilians from thieves and get attacked by the Inheritors Bora and her twin brother Bricks, who like it when the spiders run for their lives. Present-day Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, and Anya, one of the many to use the name Spider-Girl, show up for a critical mission, but Spider-Woman's not happy. Out of everyone here, she is the most experienced, having been both an agent for Hydra and an agent for S.H.I.E.L.D. She gives this rallying speech about the mission not being about courage or heart, it's about running and hiding. Tramp your ego all the way down and never stop moving. As cold as it sounds, I think the advice is spot on for this group. Spider people always seem to let their emotions get the best of them, which is normally fine since they're super powered, but the Inheritors are not a threat that should be taken lightly. I think this also helps to show that despite having the prefix Spider in front of her gender for her superheroine name, that's really the only thing she has in common with the rest of the spider people. She is also not one of the spider totems, so the Inheritors aren't actively seeking her out and they aren't able to track her like they can the rest of the group. Despite her rallying speech, Jess also portrays Silk as a helpless girl who needs protection and to be on their guard or she's going to get them killed. Of course, Silk overhears this and strikes out on her own to prove she's not a liability, but then she gets attacked by a monster, several bad guys, and pursued by Bora and Brix. Maybe Jess was right? Meanwhile, Jess uses her interdimensional watch, because everyone has them nowadays, to travel to the homeworld of the Inheritors called Loom World to do some recon. She's immediately recognized and offered a selection of wardrobes and brought to Namor's throne room to pick out valuable salvage, which Jess immediately quips as a booty call. And then she uses her pheromone powers to bedazzle the dude and get valuable intel from him. Also, there's drinking involved. Apparently, the Jessica Drew everyone's mistaken her for does not wear a mask, and she travels with bodyguards that shove children out of the way when they try to give her gifts. Yeah, she's a real piece of work. And she's subservient to the Inheritors, who enlist her aid when Silk escapes through a portal to Loomworld. Unfortunately for Silk, her Dimension Hopper watch thingy is broken in the pursuit, so Jess swaps hers with Silk and tells her to get the heck out of there, which she does, only to hop to Earth 3145, which is the post-thermonuclear war and is still fully irradiated. And this would have been seen previously in Spider-Verse #1. Earth 3145 is also home to Ben Parker, who became Spider-Man in this reality, but retired after his wife May and nephew Peter were killed by the Emerald Elf. Yes, this reality's Green Goblin. Silk observes something very interesting here, though, as Brix isn't able to handle the atmosphere and nearly chokes to death before Bora pulls him back through the portal, thus establishes the one place in the universe that they can't follow. Silk, on the other hand, uses her webbing powers to spin herself a websmat suit to protect her from the radiation. Man, the spider-powered puns are positively profuse. So we also find out that Morlun and the Jessica Drew from another dimension are lovers. Well, our Jess traps the other one in a treasure chest and poses as her to get more intel and is forced to make out with the crazy criminal creep. Gross. She fakes a stomach ache, runs off to find head of security, which is none other than Mary Jane Watson, because why not? Punches her in the face to steal her security ID card, and then goes through a locked door to encounter the Master Weaver, who spins the web of life and destiny, which in a nutshell means he sort of controls the multiverse. We find out he is also subservient to the Inheritors, but has been secretly making little acts of rebellion to help ensure the spider-powered people win. He provides Jess with some documents that explain everything they need to know to win the war, which seems like a totally safe idea. She uses the busted dimensional thingy to send the documents to Spidey, but unfortunately gets stranded on Loomworld for real this time. She tries to hide out on the pirate ship where she sent the treasure chest with her doppelganger inside, but of course she breaks out, and everyone is now teamed up against her. But don't worry, Silk arrives with backup to knock the pirates out and free Jess from having to walk the plank like a petty scallywag. Yar! Since these are tie-in issues, the rest of the events from here are covered in The Amazing Spider-Man, so unfortunately you don't get to find out how the war gets resolved, but spoiler warning, the good guys win and the bad guys lose. And we get one more issue to show us the power vacuum on Loomworld and set up the previously subservient version of Jessica Drew as its new leader. But we do get some nice post-war conversation in the last issue, which I think is really great to have the characters interact when there isn't a crisis going on. Captain Marvel, a.k.a. Carol Danvers, shows up to ask Jess the important questions like, how does one Spider-Man address another Spider-Man in a room full of Spider-Men? Apparently there's a lot of pointing.
That man's an imposter! That man is the imposter!
But the important thing about the last issue is that it sets up the future for Jessica Drew's third ongoing series. She quits the Avengers to start a new life and to focus on helping ordinary civilians, and she also gets a brand new suit redesign for the first time since the 1980s. The series ends up being interrupted by Marvel's 2015 Secret Wars event and ends with issue 10, but then Spider-Woman is relaunched several months later with a new issue #1, still written by Hopeless, and it continued the story from the previous volume. She still has her own solo series as of February 2022, but it's written by Carla Pacheco, who has mainly written one-offs and short miniseries for The Amazing Spider-Man, Carnage, Gwenpool, and many other non-Spider related books such as Elektra, Deadpool, Fantastic Four, 2099, and more. I really like Jessica Drew because she's quippy like the Spider People, but she's also serious like an agent on the outside, while also having a self-conscious monologue going on the inside. She doesn't quite fit into the Spider world, but doesn't necessarily fit into the Avengers either, and I think that's what helps make her a unique character. As a huge fan of both Jessica Drew and the Spider-Verse, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. As a standalone trade, however, it's severely lacking in story detail that you have to have some knowledge with by reading crossover events from other series, so that's something that may not be for everyone. This is more like a side adventure in a larger scheme of things, but as a side adventure, I think it's a lot of fun, and it stays true to the characters, and it doesn't depend on Spider-Man to come in and save the day. I would highly recommend this to anyone wanting to read a really solid Jessica Drew story, but I also understand that it's part of a larger story, so it may not be for everyone if you're not into the whole crossover event stuff. But it is also a good segue into her 2015 solo series, so take it for what you will. And that's a wrap. Don't forget to check out our podcast, We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones, on anchor.fm/bonelesscomicspodcast, our website, bonelesscomicspodcast.wordpress.com, and our YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/bonelesscomicspodcast. Give us a like, subscribe to us, and send us comments with your thoughts on our podcast. You can also find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and I'll get you later.
We like
Comics?
because they have no